9 Fort York, and I'm joined today by MPP Alexa Gilmore from Parkdale High Park, MPP Kristen Wong-Tam from Toronto Centre, and also by Ed Hoare, the chair of Waterfront for All, and Jim Panu, who's a photographer and producer who's worked in over 40 countries and has spent hundreds of hours planning flight plans. Let's see, we're here today to talk about the Billy Bishop Airport, and the Conservative strategy over the last 8 years with each of their real estate scandals has been to forge ahead, to hide the details until it's too late to turn around. And we saw this with the Ontario place. If we had known from the beginning that it was going to cost taxpayers $2.2 billion and that Therma had lied about their financial credibility in order to land the contract, we would have stopped it. We were able to stop the Greenbelt scandal because we got the details quickly enough that the government had to backtrack. Fortunately, with the Billy Bishop Airport, there are two studies, one by Ports Toronto and the other by Air Canada, which show that this is a really bad idea to expand the Billy Bishop Airport. It doesn't make financial sense. It's too small. The airport's too small. It's too expensive to do. It's already too congested down there. And the health and noise impacts on the tourism industry in the waterfront would be absolutely devastating. So I'll pass it over to our first speaker, Ed Hoare, who's the chair of Waterfront for All.
Hi, thanks very much, Chris. My name is Ed Hoare. I'm a lawyer and a fairly frequent traveler. And I just want to throw a couple of slides up that have to do with what we know about the JETS expansion. We've got two studies, as Chris said. One is by Oliver Wyman, which is Air Canada's consultants. And they said, among other things, that you would have to have runway approach lighting for about 700 meters at the end of the runway. That's in addition to the 900 meters that's mentioned in the Globe and Mail today. In other words, the runway would come out a bunch of distance, and then you would have the runway approach lighting. They also said you would actually have to move the entire runway south because there's not enough room otherwise. So what that means is that probably the Hanlan's Point ferry would be removed. It would be eliminated altogether. The other significant report, which is 1,000 pages long, is the Toronto Port Authority's own environmental assessment. And what it says is, among other things, you'd have to have jet blast deflectors. Could I go, let's see, next slide is here. There we are. These are two visualizations because there's never been an actual release of what they would look like, but they're kind of like fences or deflectors that would be into the runway, both ends. You can see that it's a sort of a wraparound there. Around 15 to 20 feet high, out in the middle of the harbor, there would be sound blast barriers along the side, so it would look awful. That is what would be in our harbor. The EA is interesting as well. Remember, this is Toronto Port Authority's own experts. They said that the island airport causes increased chances of lung cancer, tumors, and other bad health effects. So in summary, what obviously needs to be done is we need to really look carefully at what the health effects and what the other impacts are of this proposal. The current expansion that we've just heard about is not going to solve these problems, I don't believe. Thanks. We're going to have Jim Panu next.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Ed and all. About 11 years ago, when we first started pushing back at the airport expansion for jets, we decided to model what an airport actually looks like using Transport Canada standards. Now, airports have protective spaces around them that nothing is supposed to get past. In this situation here, this particular circle, this exists in other parts of the country, but not like this, the way that buildings penetrate through that space. The Toronto Island zoning regulations is what's in effect right now, and what we're looking at here is the Toronto Island zoning regulations, protective surfaces that nothing can go past. You can see over there the buildings, potential buildings in the portlands. They're not coming through there. Under the newest standards, which is if jets are allowed, this is what's going to happen in the portlands. That safety surface is going to come down really quite low. Those towers are about 40 stories. They're going to have to take haircuts. Even if they can make that, is that a good idea? You know, having airplanes flying so close to the buildings. The Western Gap will likely be closed off under the plan that was announced this morning. This is from Access to Information document from 2014. This is what the people at Transport Canada were saying. Looks like they plan to extend those runways into the lake. Simply amazing, responded somebody. This will likely become very hot potato for us, as we collectively have already given exemptions to all segments of aviation. So to have allowed jets back then, or to allow now, we would be looking at exemptions that Transport Canada will have to grant. And I'll leave it for Kristen next.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Kristen Wong-Tam. I'm the representative for Toronto Centre. There's a straightforward reality here, folks, and that is that Toronto does not need to fly jets over its waterfront or extend runways at the Billy Bishop Island Airport to meet this city's, province, and country's air travel needs. The Pearson lift expansion at the Toronto Pearson International Airport represents currently one of the largest infrastructure transformations in our province. LIFT stands for long-term investment in facilities and terminals. It's a multi-billion-dollar plan to modernize and expand the Pearson Airport over the next 10 years. This includes massive upgrades to Terminals 1 and 3. New terminal capacity, improved passenger processing, major investments in digital systems, sustainability, fast ground access for more plane taxi stands, more plane taxi lanes, I should say, more plane stands, more gates, more slots. All of this has been approved. It's designed and progressively funded with a groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for May the 11th, just 13 days away. At its core, the Pearson Lift campaign is about growth. Today, Pearson handles more than 47 million passengers annually, but under the Lift expansion, this number will rise to about 65 million to 70 million passengers per year, and they will achieve those numbers by the early 2030s. This represents an increase of 18 to 24 million additional passengers moving through our city and region each year. Contrast Pearson's growth numbers with Billy Bishop's shrinkage. Before COVID, Billy Bishop moved only 2.8 million passengers. Today, their numbers are hovering at 1.7 million passengers. They have lost over 800,000 passengers and cannot recover without recklessly paving over Lake Ontario and permanently altering Toronto's natural waterfront. The Pearson Lift expansion is no small upgrade. It's a fundamental reshaping of how Pearson operates and moves over 65 to 70 million passengers per year. The decisions we make now will define air travel, economic development, and livability in our city, our province, and for decades to come. The success of air travel for our future is at Pearson International Airport. It is not at the Island Airport. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you talk about birds?
I didn't.
No? Could you talk about birds?
I'll just talk briefly about birds. I had a slide, which maybe I can bring up. It is the Miracle on the Hudson that people remember. There it is, where what happened is there was a plane that took off in New York. Canada Geese went in the intake. Jets have big intakes. And, of course, the plane went down in the Hudson, as we all know. There was a famous movie with Tom Hanks. What that tells us, though, is that birds and airplanes, jets, don't go together well. Now, on our waterfront, we have a lot of bird areas. We have Toronto Island, of course. We now have Minising down at the foot of the Don. We have the Leslie Street Spit. We have lots of areas with lots of big birds, and it's inconsistent. So what does it all mean? What will happen? It may mean that those areas have to be paved over, covered in gravel. We don't know. We know they're all in what's called the primary strike zone under Transport Canada regulations. So that's yet another thing that the city and the province and the federal government have to look at really carefully. What are we giving up in return for this expansion?
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll just sum up. So if you look at those two reports, one by Ports Toronto and the other one by Air Canada, the summary is that the Billy Bishop is just too small. It's only 200 acres. The next smallest airport in North America that has jets is 600 acres, and that's San Diego. It's too crowded. Doug Ford wants to bring in another 8 million passengers to the downtown core, to Billy Bishop, not to visit the downtown core, but to actually fly out. And so the traffic, in one of the reports, it talks about with half of that, the estimate for the environmental assessment, they were working with 5 million passengers a year. And they said this would cause a 450% increase in downtown traffic. If you double that, Ford wants to double that from 5 million to 10 million. So what does that mean in terms, is that 1,000%, 900% increase in downtown traffic? There just isn't the room. The Billy Bishop Airport's at the end of a dead-end street just off of Bathurst. There's just not enough room. He said the reports also say it's too dangerous. Already, the airport, to fly what it has today, is getting exemptions from the safety standards because you're not supposed to be flying major traffic, air traffic, that close to the high-rise buildings along the waterfront. So they've already got exemptions, and they're going to need more exemptions if they're going to bring in jets as well. And it's not safe as well for the people along the waterfront, including the kids at the school, because the environmental assessment says that having that many fumes, having a jet fly by right 200 meters from a school, every 2.5 minutes, that the pollution from that is going to cause lung cancers, it's going to cause lesions. We already have a pocket of cancers in one of the co-ops nearby. So the question is, why are we even discussing this? Why is this even coming up? Why did Ford make this announcement? Why has he introduced legislation to seize the control of the Toronto Islands? And you've got to follow the money. So in 2015, Newport bought the Billy Bishop terminal from Porter. And it turned out to be a really bad deal because a couple of years later, they're suing Porter to try to get back $120 million. Today, their air traffic is down by 30%. So Newport, which is one of the big investments for Newport, is JP Morgan. JP Morgan is losing money on this investment in the airport. If they have a massive expansion of the airport, and the government, we as taxpayers provide billions of dollars to expand it, then they can make a profit off their investment in the terminal. But we will be losing the 28 million visitors in the downtown core along the waterfront. Toronto waterfront is Canada's #1 tourist destination. 28 million visitors a year, about $20 billion in economic activity. And that would be lost, or it would be certainly hampered, if you have a jet flying by every 2.5 minutes and you can't listen to a concert or can't hear a concert at the Budweiser stage or Harbourfront or at the Music Garden. So this is a really, really bad idea. We're fortunate to have these two reports because they show just how bad this idea is, and we've got to push Doug Ford to back off on it. And our leverage point is the federal government, because airports are federally regulated. The federal liberal government has control. Doug Ford cannot do anything at the airport without the liberal government without their say-so. So we need to put pressure on the liberal MPs in Toronto and on the federal liberal government, because they are the ones who can stop it. They can save the islands. They can save Little Norway Park. They can save the kids at that school. They can save our downtown Toronto waterfront. So that's where the pressure needs to go. And we'll open up to questions.
I wonder, you both underlined that the popularity of the airport has gone down, I think, by 30%. Isn't that a problem? How do you fix that? Should you fix it? Like, isn't that a problem long term for the airport?
Well, it's not our responsibility to fix that. It's not the taxpayers of Toronto. So the question is, should Ontario taxpayers put billions of dollars into the expansion of the Billy Bishop Airport when it's not safe, it's too small, it doesn't make sense. But it would be good for Newport's and JP Morgan's investment. If it's to benefit them, to put billions of our tax dollars into that, I don't think we should be doing it. This would be another boondoggle on the waterfront.
The Toronto Port Authority has talked about what's happening at the islands, and it said recently that any plan that it's involved in, it will not reduce the overall island space. So I'm just wondering what you make of that statement and whether it's reassuring at all.
Okay, I'll pass it to my colleague.
Thank you for the question. We have heard many times that this premier was not going to touch lands that were sacrosanct, lands that were important to our farming. Greenbelt is an example of that. So when we hear that the Ford government is planning to take over the islands, but not necessarily do anything with it, we cannot trust this government. And when we see that the reports are talking about 900 meters of infill to build a runway all the way out from the islands to my riding in Parkdale High Park, with another 720 meters of lights popping up. We have to say no to this. And we don't know yet if they are going to use any part of the island. But what we do know is that the project as it is will affect rowing clubs, yachting clubs, boating clubs, paddling clubs, the folks who use the Martin Goodman Trail, children who are on the beach. Can you imagine if there's a situation where we have the Miracle on the Hudson and birds, the 100,000 birds on that center island, fly into a jet and crash, God forbid, onto the beach or onto the water right next to those families? So the entire idea that the Ford government should take over the islands, should take over this airport and do it is clearly not in the interest of Torontonians. It's clearly in the interest of someone else. We wish we had the freedom of information ability to find out who, but it is not safe. It has too much congestion. It's going to cost too much. Pearson Airport's already got an expansion. It is not what Torontonians want. And so we need to say no to this.
And, the government seems quite gung-ho about this idea. Do you think land swaps should be on the table? Is there anything that the province could do to get Toronto back elsewhere in that sort of way?
There's no other park beside Little Norway Park right there for that community. That is that community's park. There's a school right there. There's children that go to the school every day. There's a community center right there. You're going to have jets landing and taking off every 2.5 minutes, 200 meters from an elementary school. That's not safe. It's not safe in terms of it's the noise. It's not safe in terms of the traffic that's going to be happening down there. And it's not safe in terms of the fumes. You cannot, inundate children with those kinds of fumes, especially when the Ports Authority own environmental assessment says that the fumes will cause cancers and throat lesions. Like, we can't subject our kids to that. This is it's a really, really bad idea. And it's another one of Doug Ford's billion-dollar boondoggle where he squanders our tax dollars just like he did at Ontario Place, just like he did at the Science Centre, all of the property along the 413 and the Bradford bypass were bought up by his friends just before he announced those projects. This is another real estate scam by the Doug Ford Conservative government, and it needs to be stopped before he destroys our waterfront.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Charlie, thank you for your question. I think that one thing that we can recognize that when it comes to land economics is that there is extreme value and markups when it comes to waterfront property. Waterfront property around the world tends to be the most expensive real estate in the world. It is sought after. It is oftentimes destination driven. And we put industrial uses, which are oftentimes dirty and polluting uses, away from densely populated area. The City of Toronto, over 75 years ago, started to decommission industrial uses along the waterfront, which is why we don't see the heavy carbon-related industry down there. What we have left are grandfathered uses. That's what we see in big industry. But most of those other industrial uses, such as abattoirs, such as pulp and paper. Like that's all removed because there was a different purpose and a higher purpose now for the waterfront. And we need to recognize that the investments that have been made into revitalizing the waterfront with respect to cultural assets as well as expanded green space, making it much more pedestrian friendly, and also the built up of the mixed income neighborhoods, that is all purposefully planned. And I would say that that has been careful planning, oftentimes done in broad consultation with thousands and thousands of residents. So what Doug Ford is proposing for the waterfront is a revert, is going back to heavy industrial polluting uses, and there is no need, especially since I've clearly laid out that Pearson International Airport has a project that's ready to go that they're breaking ground on in less than 2 weeks. I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised if Doug Ford is at the groundbreaking for that the new terminal space and all the investments that are going there. So the question here is, who has the Premier been talking to, and why is he not making this available to all of us? And more importantly, there has been no feasibility study or business case that's been put forward by the Premier to speak about why this particular use, the expansion of Billy Bishop Airport, the paving over our lakes, and the destruction of our natural habitat, how that can be justified, and where is this information, where is the request coming from? Because it's certainly not from Torontonians. Sorry. Thank you.
A geographically nearby note, at Ontario Place, for the contract to build a parking garage. In documents that they got, there was described as within the optional scope of the parking garage project for a massive digital media wall, so of 700 square meters of LED screens, so essentially a digital billboard about the size of 1.5 basketball courts, could be a part of the parking garage at Ontario Place. Just wondering what any of you make of that potential addition.
Okay. It doesn't surprise me. It's the first I've heard about this. It doesn't surprise me because Doug Ford's hell-bent on destroying our waterfront and hell-bent on giving as many taxpayer dollars as he possibly can to all his friends and donors. And we've seen that over and over again, so that they're going to put a giant billboard on this parking garage. I mean, the beauty of living in Toronto is that we are a waterfront city. And people love the waterfront. 28 million visitors a year to the downtown Toronto waterfront, and they're coming there for concerts. They're coming there sometimes just to walk, just to go over to the islands and visit Centerville, to visit, Hanlon's Point, to visit, just to ride those crazy four-wheel bicycles over on the island. There's boaters in the harbor. And Doug Ford is saying, oh, well, none of those people matter. None of the people who use the waterfront matter. There's money to be made by expanding this airport. There's money to be made by having a giant billboard that's going to block the view of the water over at Ontario Place. And so this is his way of doing it, because he has a cottage up on Lake Muskoka, and not everybody in Toronto does. Most of us use the downtown Toronto waterfront as our waterfront access, and Doug Ford's not proposing to have jets or a giant billboard in front of his cottage at Muskoka. I think he would get a lot of pushback, and we should push back here at our waterfront for our waterfront. We need to protect our waterfront in Toronto.
Charlie, thank you. Having been a former city councillor, I spent a lot of time at city council deliberating over sign variance bylaws. And I think it's safe to say that, City Council has struck a balance to the best that they could, despite the extraordinary pressures that come from the sign lobby to place signage and third-party advertising on buildings. It is highly profitable. But one thing that needs to be noted is that once a sign is approved, or in this case, Doug will not even go through City Council, he's not asking for a variance, but once the Premier gets his way with this massive 700-meter screen, is that you'll see the proliferation of applications coming in from all the other building owners and landowners. They will become so profitable that they are not going to be motivated to build anything, which is what we saw in Times Square in New York, is that the billboards around Times Square became so profitable for those land and property owners that they decided to keep some of their buildings empty because they generated enough revenues just from the digital billboards.
Going back to Billy Bishop, every time we've asked the federal government if they agree with the expansion plan, they basically said, before any changes, we will consult every community, every Indigenous communities. Is that a fair response, do you think?
Go ahead, Alexa.
I think we've seen with this premier the first use of Bill 5. He intends to build this without consultation, without regard for environmental assessments, and I think that when we know that if the premier takes over the city part, we know that there's no will on the part of the government of the province to consult with the community. That's essentially what Bill 5 gives them the power to do. So we're not seeing at this point a pathway forward with the federal government, but that's what we hope. We hope that the federal government will be the sober second thought on this and will ensure that Torontonians have a say in their waterfront. And so this is part of our ask here is that our federal MPs from Toronto understand that the waterfront is the space of sort of quiet and calm and beauty for many in Toronto, for 28 million visitors, and that they will consult with those members before going ahead. It's frankly shocking, given the presentation that we've made today, that anyone would be considering expanding this airport at this time, but certainly without giving Torontonians a chance to weigh in on the waterfront that means so much to all of us.
I just want to add to your very important question around Indigenous consultation with Indigenous communities. The duty to consult has not been removed. And I think it's important for us to recognize that the Mississaugas of the Credit have existing water claims on Toronto's shoreline, which they have never abandoned. So I want to ensure that the Mississaugas and all Indigenous nations who have interest in preserving this waterfront, not for construction and not for rapid development and reckless development, but for its natural habitat, is that the Mississaugas of the Credit should be at the table. And if they're not, then Doug Ford has once again missed a very important step.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.